What's up, everyone? Online Prep Coach Ask here at thepepcoach.com. Right now, we're going to be talking about modafinil. So kind of a modafinil type seminar. You guys know that modafinil, of probably all the neurochemical compounds, probably gave me the biggest bang for my buck. It's given me the best change neuroplastically over time. That, neuroplastic drills, lion's mane, there's some key components that I absolutely love. But that being said, remember, not everyone responds well to modafinil. I have a couple people that are literally non-responders right now, and there are alternatives for those individuals. So we're going to start off with, we can look at the structure, we're going to look at what it does, and first of all, let's actually look at what's going on in the brain, because I think that kind of has the most impact to understand just how big of a player this really is. Because when we talk about turning up the dial on neurochemistry, you'll see why I say that the dial is literally everything except GABA. So if we look at kind of putting modafinil right in the middle. And I do apologize, you're going to see the back of my head a lot in this video because there's just a lot of things to talk about. First of all, we're going to see it coming over here and increasing dopamine in the accumbens. From there, we are also going to see an increase in glutamate in the substantia nigra. And we're gonna first label everything, and then we'll kind of get back into what does what matters, what you can not worry about, and all that kind of stuff. We're then gonna see an increase in acetylcholine in the striatum. We're then going to see an increase in orexin in the lateral hypothalamus. We then see, I usually lump these two together, but I'm separating them for this video, that increase in histamine. This is going to be over in the cortex. And remember, global histamine is not the same as brain-based histamine. Same thing with orexin and acetylcholine, but we'll get to that. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to see an increase in norepinephrine. This is mainly happening over in the thalamus. Hey, looks a little bit better. And now we're going to have two more things. First, we're going to have an increase in serotonin in the central nucleus of the amygdala. Now we see the downregulation in GABA. Yeah, that looks good. In the actually the medial preoptic areas. So obviously there's a lot going on. So whenever I say we turn up the dial on modafinil, or rather I turn up the dial on neurochemistry with modafinil, this is why, because it's affecting just about every single system neurochemically speaking. And I do say neurochemistry instead of saying monoamines or neurotransmitters, because if you look at the science, we are breaking things apart and they do fit into different categories. To me, I don't really care, because you can have cross stimulation. The law of locality literally dictates things are so close in the brain that one stimulation over here is going to cause stimulation over there. We can see that with the dopamine and the accumbens and the glutamate and the substantia nigra and the acetylcholine in the striatum. And then you start realizing, oh, acetylcholine's fueling this process, that's fueling that process, depends on receptor sensitivity, tons of things. So I don't like really saying neurotransmitter or monoamines. I like kind of blanket statement saying, overall neurochemistry, because to me, it's, even though it's more broad, to me, it's also more specific. So we have all of that. Remember, histamine in the brain is going to drive, a lot of these are going to be driving a lot of alertness. So we have a couple things going on here. The main kind of alertness players are really coming from, and I'll change colors for this, right? So we have a lot of, oh, that's a terrible color, actually. That's way too light, or maybe it's just my colorblind eyes that can't see too well. We're going to go red, right? So the orexin and the histamine are going to be massive arousal players. We are going to see, and actually glutamate is also going to be more of the arousal side of things. We're then going to see the acetylcholine and the dopamine not only driving up overall mood, but we're going to say is overall function. Because remember, our brain is operating and fueled with acetylcholine, ketone bodies, glucose, all that kind of stuff. So we know that acetylcholine and dopamine kind of go hand in hand. We also see a little bit of change to function and arousal with the norepinephrine. So we're going to kind of tag those onto both of those. Now, this is where it's interesting. It is the management of serotonin and dopamine that gives someone that good feeling from serotonin. So in this scenario, if you were someone who takes modafinil and does not feel good, it could be because it's hyperstimulating one and downregulating the other. Generally, most people can get a good stimulation on serotonin and dopamine and balance that out. But again, those are the people that are poor responders and get a bad effect from it. And then we have the downregulation in GABA, which is going to generally drive up arousal and then mood and functionality. And although we could break these into other players, I kind of like focusing on the biggest three, which is mood and function and arousal. So arousal, stimulation, whereas this is more the actual neurochemical function in and of itself. So there's a lot of things going on with modafinil. And to understand a little bit more about it, we have to look at the structure, right? So I am pretty bad at drawing little carbons and all that kind of stuff. I can't make a diamond. So we're going to basically look at the structure. Again, forgive me, not accurate. But we can understand the basics, right? So the core of modafinil is this actual sulfur group, right? And then we have our amide group over there. We have a diphenylmethyl group over here. So the core structure is right here in the middle, right? Why this is important to understand this structure is because the way modafinil gets metabolized is it'll either be hydrolyzed or it'll be oxidized. So if we will actually go ahead and go through the process of hydrolysis, so I'll put this down here. Versus the process of hydrolysis is going to give us the downstream metabolites. So we're either going to have modafinilic acid, or if you're reading the research, it usually says modafinil acid, and other ones will say modafinilic acid, whichever one doesn't really matter. It's the actual acid. So we'll say modafinilic acid, or we have the oxidation, and that gives us the actual modafinil sulfone, right? Now, whenever modafinil gets metabolized, the hydrolysis to give us modafinilic acid is actually happening right here. So it's going to be replaced. And if you're actually having the oxidation occur, that's going to be happening right here. And what we're going to see is actual additional oxygen double bonded there. So, again, the reason why this is important to understand is because certain people will have a terrible response to one of these downstream metabolites and become a poor responder to modafinil. Or you're people that are hyper responders and you get a massive spillover in the 48-hour window perimeter. Most people, I'd say probably 80% of individuals, get a good ability of dismantling, meaning they can hydrolyze, they can oxidize, there's no problems at all. There's an overstimulation of the central nucleus of the amygdala. There's not overstimulation of the accumbens with dopamine. They respond amazingly well. They function perfectly for 12 to 16 hours, so their day is amazing. It doesn't affect sleep. And then the next day, they're slightly more mentally aroused. So it's because these people are hyper responders, which is probably 80% of people, and we get a positive downstream metabolic action of these metabolites. So if we have the 20% of people that don't respond well, it's usually because they're metabolizing these things too fast. So hydrolysis happens too fast, oxidation happens too fast, we are changing these groups way too fast, and we're generally getting hyper or hypostimulation of different centers. So if you are someone who is taking modafinil and getting too jittery, like you're kind of like wigging out and everything like that, which we see happen all the time, it's usually going to be over in the dopaminergic, serotonergic, and acetylcholine-based world. If you have someone who tends to get a big driver down on appetite, so it really tanks your appetite for the day, usually going to be more orexin-related, potentially histamine-related as well, but usually more orexin-related. If you are someone who has a different kind of stimulation. So it's not the neurological, like, can't calm down, like a cup of coffee. Usually the tachycardia, which doesn't usually happen, maybe the 20% of people, that's usually glutamate. So glutamate level is pushing down GABA because it's that balancing effect. It'll overstimulate GABA, which then cross-stimulate cardiac tissue, change sinus rhythm of the brain, and give you that tachycardic heartbeat effect right over there, changing the substantia nigra. And by the way, there is 3 to 5 centers in the brain, dopaminergic-wise, that modafinil affects. And then multiple ones for glutamate, multiple ones for acetylcholine. These are the main ones that I look at, but you could literally fill up this board with different areas that it's driving dopamine or acetylcholine or orexin and all that kind of stuff. So it's important to understand, but I wanted to illustrate this to show you guys it's affecting every center in the brain, right? And at the same time, depending on how it's metabolized, will be why you're a good or poor responder to it. Now, the cool thing is for the non-responders, there is Orexin A. There, I got crap on my fingers. There is Orexin A nasal sprays, which again, if you took the Orexin A nasal spray, you are not gonna have what? No GABA, no 5-HTP, no norepinephrine, no histamine, no acetylcholine, no glutamate, no dopamine. What also aren't you gonna have? These metabolic problems. Because guess what? You are not taking modafinil. You're taking a downstream metabolite, being Orexin A. So we know the structure. We know how vast it is actually acting in the brain. We're going to look at the implementation process and then talk about Orexin A as well. To my knowledge right now, Orexin A is only available in a nasal spray for the public at, I think it's Limitless Biotech. I'll put a link in the description box below or at the bottom wherever I post this on the paid site. But we're going to have Orexin A, and I'm going to go nasal spray or modafinil. So first, we're going to cross compare, right? Usually people are looking for Orexin A or modafinil. They're looking for the changes to long-term neuroplasticity. If we're trying to rank them in terms of, because remember, neuroplasticity, our ability for our brain to change, right? So making ourselves better over time, not band-aiding the problem, that's mainly going to give the nod to modafinil because it affects more neural centers, has a higher potential to drive neuroplasticity. Everything is going to drive neuroplasticity to some degree if you're backing up with actions. But if we want to give the nod, we're going to say modafinil. That's going to be the king between these two when it comes to neuroplasticity. And again, Orexin A is still going to drive neuroplasticity, but modafinil is going to take the cake. So modafinil, king there. Now, what about overall focus and concentration? Again, modafinil, because it stimulates so many centers in the brain, is still going to take the cake with that one, but it's also doing multiple other things. So if you just need that focus, alertness, concentration, and arousal, just that, and really nothing else, I would probably say Orexin A as a nasal spray takes the cake because this is literally doing one thing and it's mainly focusing on arousal, concentration, all that stuff. But that means you're also going to be depleting dopamine, depleting serotonin, potentially running into problems. So far, if we had to compare the two, we're saying more neuroplasticity, long-term changes, and then more increase in concentration and focus, because that's all it does. But we are also then getting the change to every other bit of neurochemistry in circulation, therefore potentiating all the effects of neuroplasticity. So modafinil is going to be the king for, I'm literally going to say, everything else. Because you get the arousal, the focus, the concentration, the mood-based changes, literally everything happens with our modafinil. Whereas if we just want to have straight focus and concentration, that comes with an Orexin A nasal spray. So there can also be times to use in combination. So we kind of broke those apart. I tend to say if you're a good responder to modafinil, keep it in play and then have Orexin A on hand for days wherever you're as happy as can be. You only need a little bit of extra concentration and focus and interchange them in and out. But first, let's get to modafinil usage. So let's say you're a good responder to modafinil. We're trying to make the neuroplastic changes long-term, right? So we've talked about this protocol beforehand. We are beginning week 1 with about 50 milligrams. And this could be any 3 days of the week. Again, we kind of limit it to 3 days because if you have it more, then you are going to be replacing. So you run into problems with any drug when you take it every single day. It is then replacing and not, causing the Band-Aid effect instead of giving us a runway to build up the underlying systems. So over time, our baseline goes up. We're always going to be better when we're operating on it, but we'll eventually get to a point to where you might not even need it certain days. So I specifically have worked modafinil up to crazy high doses in the past. Crazy high for me. Crazy high for me was like 300-400 milligrams, which is a lot of modafinil. I can't take more than 100 now or else I don't respond well because my baseline was way down here and over time, I built it all the way up here. So we have week 1 and now we're gonna be tapering up, okay? And this is gonna depend on the individual. Once you feel amazing and perfect, stop there, you know that's your dose. But we're gonna be doing an undulating pattern to week 2. You're going up by 100 milligrams. And again, it doesn't have to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Any 3 days of the week whenever you need the most amount of action, neuroplasticity. Week 3, go to 150 milligrams Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And again, if you ever get overstimulated, stop. So you can keep building this up weekly until you get overstimulated. Then once you, let's say at 150 you get overstimulated, then you recycle it and work back down. So then week 4 would then come to 100, and then week 5 will go to 50, and then you would work back. And so you're trying to have this over time where every 3 weeks you're coming up, coming down, coming up, coming down. And then once you know, after about, tends to be about 2 to 3 months. After about 2 to 3 months, you know, okay, I respond perfectly to 100 milligrams, 50 is not enough, and 150 is way too much, then you stay there. And that's when you keep it there and bring in other players to drive other bits of neuroplasticity. And that means to drive performance. So that's usually how we like to set up modafinil. Most people respond best to about 100 milligrams. 100, 150 is usually good. 50 milligrams usually isn't enough. But we like to start off and say that just in case, because there's always going to be hyper responders out there. If you have to work up to 500 milligrams a day of modafinil, probably not your compound. I genuinely say if we start having to work up to 200, 250, 300, probably better compounds. Because remember, what's going to happen with this? You are going to burn through acetylcholine. You're going to burn through ketone bodies. So the need for more neurological fuel is going to come in. So that's a terrible. This is where if you have to replace acetylcholine, so you start getting the headaches in the back of your neck, traps, that's your brain pulling acetylcholine from those areas trying to fuel your brain activity, we would take alpha GPC. 300 milligrams, 600 milligrams, cause take some acetyl carnitine, 500 milligrams a gram to just donate more methyl groups to the acetylcholine synthetic process. Tons of things, but with modafinil, you're going to need to make sure you are fueling. So now let's say you've gone through modafinil and you know how you respond to it, or you took modafinil and you're not a good responder. Now we go to the Orexin A nasal spray. Just arousal, just focus, just concentration, right? The spray, again, the only one available, I believe, is from Limitless Biotech, which again, I'll put the link down below. This, you would start off with 1 spray. Generally, the dosage range for that product is about 1 to 3 sprays, potentially working up to 1 to 5. And the frequency is going to depend on your modafinil usage. So between these two, because Orexin's getting stimulated, the total usage is about 3 times per week. More than that, you run into a Band-Aid effect. You could do less than that, but we're trying to optimize neurochemistry here, right? So normally, if you're taking 2 days of modafinil, 1 day of Orexin A. Or if you don't respond well to modafinil, then you're just doing 3 days of Orexin A. Ideally, having a cool-off period in between. So I like the Monday, Wednesday, Friday setup, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever, because usually these spill over for a good 48 hours. Even Orexin A, half-lives do not matter here. Remember, we are making epigenetic changes in the non-genomic and genomic fashion. So this is something that's really going to greatly affect you, not just now and tomorrow, but literally for the rest of your lives. And that's why you have to be careful when you take these things, because sometimes it can flip the wrong switch or cause the wrong overstimulation problems, and you're trying to fix something for 6 months. So always take that with a grain of salt. Usually though, we're doing this, and again, it's hitting harder and faster, so this is an AM early day product, AM early day product as well, but this tends to last the entire workday. So literally from even like a 4 or 5 a.m. to like a 5, 6 p.m., we get a good 12-hour window, even though technically on paper, you should metabolize it a little bit faster. There is, if you pour through patents, there are lipid emulsion formulas out there for intranasal modafinil. Those are dosed at 1 milligram. I've tried them before and they're awesome, but I don't know anyone that actually produces them. You can find the patents out there if you just Google it. You guys know I like to read my patents, but the Orexin A is very easily made and much more accessible. So we can take that if we have poor responder to modafinil, or if we just need the focus and concentration, it's still going to drive long-term adaptation. It's still going to drive neuroplasticity, just not as much as modafinil. So we have these two options. We like to keep them kind of truncated to 3 times per week frequency maximum, so we'll make sure we're driving neuroplasticity long-term and we're not just having the Band-Aid effect occur. That's pretty much all we're going to be talking about with modafinil, with Orexin A nasal sprays. There are some sublingual modafinils which hit pretty hard, but I still see them having that carryover 48-hour effect. And it's not like you are the same arousal curves as the day you take modafinil or Orexin A, but the next day you're slightly elevated. So let's say your baseline's right here, right? So that's going to be where your baseline's at. You take modafinil and the day of, you go up to about here, right? That's the day of modafinil. Then the following day, you're down there about halfway, which is still above your baseline. And then by day 3, if you don't take it again, then you're kind of back to baseline. That goes against, if you look at the kinetic rates, dismantling rates, take into account different esterases, different enzymes, but we see it happen time and time again because we're focusing on changing neuroplasticity. So a lot of people will get a fall off point by that 3rd day, but then long term, you will come off and you will still have a higher baseline. Probably not as if, as much as you were taking it, but usually higher, and eventually that is essentially what my curve looks like. I started off down here without taking modafinil, and over the years, my baseline is now up here. I still get a positive change to and when I take modafinil, but the difference is now when I'm on modafinil, it's all the way up here. So you see the initial changes. Modafinil in the beginning to over time driving neuroplasticity, lower dose or the same dose and still higher actual action. That's the whole point. That's the whole goal. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check out thepippush.com. See you guys next time.